our son, Will, when he was about 4 or 5 years old, we had an event at the church where it was one of those events where we were asked to take a Sharpie and write our name on one of those peel and stick name tags and slap it on our shirt. And at some point in the event, I came across little Will, and he had a name tag on, and I noticed it didn't say Will, and I got closer, and I looked a little closer at this, and it said, "I am awesome." Except, like I said, he was 5 years old. He was just learning to write, and so he spelled awesome, O-S-U-M. So it was I am Osum, which I'm pretty sure is the name of that Nigerian prince that wanted to give me a lot of money back in the early 2000s. But I just think that story is us in a microcosm, because we live in a culture that constantly wants us to prove that we're awesome. I'm awesome. Look at my house. I'm awesome. Look at this amazing car I can drive. I'm awesome. Look at this title that I have in my work, or this award that I won in my school, or look at this amazing person I married, or these awesome kids that I've spawned and raised, and they're so much better and smarter and more attractive than your kids. We're on this journey, in this pursuit of trying to out awesome other people. And in the end, we all just look like fools. We shoot for awesome and we end up with Osum, right? That's the story of us. And one of the great things about the gospel, one of the little and less appreciated aspects of the gospel, is how it tells you again and again and again that you're not awesome. There is one who is awesome, and it is not you. In fact, you and I are so non-awesome, so anti-awesome, that the Son of God had to die just to rescue our non-awesome rear ends from eternal hell. That's the gospel. And Jesus spoke these words in a time when that was not a popular message. Roman culture was even more status conscious than American culture is today. There was actually a name for it. In Latin, it was called the cursus honorum. It meant the race for honors. And so it meant that if you were living the good life, you should always be advancing up the social ladder. People should be impressed with you. People who formerly didn't look at you, give you a second look, they should be looking up to you now. And that was what it meant to live a good life in Roman culture, which had infested even Israel at that time. Jesus comes along and says, no, pride is the root of so much evil in the human heart and in the world today, and humility is the key. If you want to get to know God, if you want to follow his ways, if you want to become the person you were created to be, it starts with humbling yourself. Jesus taught so many parables, so many teachings about this subject. One of the most famous is the Pharisee and the tax collector, and he talks about a Pharisee and a tax collector going to the temple at the same time. Now, in that time, when he started the story, everyone knew, okay, I know who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in this story. It would be like today if you said, well, the Pope and a drug dealer went to a church at the same time. He says the Pharisee prayed this self-righteous prayer, Lord, thank you for not making me an evil, wicked person like this miserable tax collector over here. But the tax collector completely abased himself before the Lord and said, Lord, have mercy on me, for I'm a sinner. And Jesus shocked the crowd by saying, that man, not the other, went away from there justified. And then he closed it by saying, whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Jesus taught this same lesson so many times, and so did the prophets, and so did the apostles. If I decided to preach every passage in the Bible that dealt with the subject of humility, I'd be preaching a full year and I'd still have some more to cover. And yet we rarely talk about it. We rarely think about it. We certainly don't reward it. We claim to admire humble people, but when's the last time someone got elected because they were humble? When's the last time someone became a billionaire because of their humility, or made the cover of a magazine, or the lead actor in a movie because of their humility? 2 Kings chapter 5 is one of those stories that tells us the power of humility versus the danger of pride. We're in this series about the kings and the prophets of Israel because we want to become like Jesus. That's what it means to be a disciple, to be with him, become like him, and to do what he did. And when we see the story of ancient Israel, we see the qualities that God was trying to place into those people because they were supposed to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, just like us. That's our calling as well. So we learn from the things they got right and the things they got wrong. And here this story, the actual main character is not an Israelite at all, not even a believer in God at the beginning of the story. His name is Naaman. Naaman was a mighty general, actually the commander of the army of the nation of Syria. Now, geographically, here was Israel, and just to the north was Syria, just like today. But in this time, in this period of time, Syria was a stronger military power than Israel was. And it was sort of like Russia and Ukraine today, where Syria really wanted to take over Israel and never could quite crack that nut, but kept invading, kept bedeviling, kept tormenting little Israel to the south. Naaman was the commander of that army, so he was worthy of respect, a mighty warrior, but he had this skin disease. In the ancient world, there was nothing more feared, no malady more dreaded than a skin disease. You could have cancer and be dying, but you would consider that better than a skin disease because a skin disease is visible, and everywhere you walk, people would shun you. I remember when our daughter was only a few months old, Carrie somehow contracted shingles, and it was on her forehead. If you've ever had shingles, it's a terrible disease. It's very painful, but everywhere she went, everyone could see. And people were incredibly rude. I remember more than one person, total stranger, come up and say, "What's the matter with your head?" And as a young husband, I wanted to punch him in the mouth and say, "What's the matter with your teeth?" But, I didn't, because I like being married and I like, freedom. But so here's Naaman, right? This man with all this power, a man who ordinarily, if you saw him in the street, you'd run up to bow before him or kiss his ring. But now everybody is pointing and talking and wondering, what has he done to deserve this? And then a little slave girl who served his wife says, "I sure wish my master would go down to Israel. There's a prophet there named Elisha, and he can heal my master." Elisha was the protege of Elijah. We saw last week when Elijah was so depressed and discouraged and ready to end his life, God said, I've got a job for you to do. I want you to anoint 2 new kings, and I want you to find a protege named Elisha, and he's going to take over for you. Now, we're having to skip a lot. There's a lot of great stories we're skipping. In fact, this is the only story about Elisha in this series that we're going to talk about, which kind of hurts my heart to skip over a lot of good stuff. But, there's other things we need to talk about this year. I will just tell you, if you read 1st and 2nd Kings, which, by the way, I highly recommend, you'll see that the ministry of Elisha turns out to be even stronger and more amazing and impressive than Elijah's ministry itself. So with all that as background, we'll see what happens when Naaman rolls into Elisha's hometown. Verse 9, we'll pick up 2 Kings chapter 5. It says, "So Naaman came with his horses and chariots and stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a messenger to him saying, 'Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored, and you shall be clean.' But Naaman was angry and went away, saying, 'Behold, I thought that he would surely come out and stand and call upon the name of the Lord his God and wave his hand over the place and cure the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar, the rivers of Damascus, better than all the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean?' So he turned and went away in a rage. But his servants came near and said to him, 'My father, it is a great word the prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean?' So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and he came and stood before him." That's an important phrase, because that's a phrase that a lesser person does to a greater person. You stand before a king, you stand before a teacher, you stand before your master. This is the mighty warrior who went away in a rage. Now he comes and he stands before the prophet. And he said, "Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel." I don't know about you, but I think Naaman just got saved. "So accept now a present from your servant." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. So you have to picture this little dusty Galilean town. We don't know exactly where Elisha lived, but it was probably in the north. And you picture just basic mud huts, very primitive homes, and into that rolls this mighty entourage, men on horseback chariots, guys carrying banners, swords, shields, armor. A messenger gets off of his horse and says something like, "Behold, Naaman the Great, the Lion of the East, the commander of the army of Syria, warrior of warriors, look upon his works, ye mighty, and despair," or something like that. And Elisha doesn't even come out of his house. Elisha, who is penniless, he doesn't have a job. He's a prophet of the Lord. He lives off charity, essentially. And he sends one of his fellow prophets out to tell him, "Go down to the Jordan and dip yourself 7 times." Now, Naaman is right about the Jordan River. I've been there, and it's really not impressive. Now, it's impressive when you think about the things that happen there, but just visually, it's not an impressive body of water. It's very small. In most parts of the Jordan are very muddy, and there's flies buzzing around. It's not as beautiful as what you see painted on the baptistries of old Baptist churches, right? It's just not. But Naaman is wrong about God. He's been raised in a culture that believes that there are many gods and that the gods essentially function like mob bosses. You know, you've seen The Godfather, you've seen gangster movies. A mob boss doesn't care if you're kind to your wife and your kids. He doesn't care if you're a good citizen or not. As long as you pay him his due, as long as you give him the tribute he deserves, he will take care of you. And that's the way the pagan gods functioned. They didn't care about your morality. They didn't care whether you were a good person, whether you loved others. They didn't care about any of that as long as you paid them their tribute, did the right rituals. They would curse your enemies for you. They would bless your crops. They would bless the fruitfulness of your wife. You would have lots of sons. You would be powerful and successful. You could buy God off in the pagan understanding. But the one true God, Naaman finds out, you can't buy him off. He's not impressed with armies and banners and riches and accomplishments and titles. And no amount of treasure can win his favor. You come to this God on his terms, not yours. And that offends Naaman because he's a man of pride. He's a man of who's used to getting his way, who's used to controlling other people. And he wants to walk away in a rage. See, the true God is a God of grace, and grace is hard for a prideful person to wrap their minds around. I love the definition of grace that Philip Yancey gives. He says, grace means there is nothing you can do to make God love you any less, and there is nothing you can do to make him love you any more. And we love the first half of that statement because that's how we got saved. That we write songs about that. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. We can gladly admit we came to God as a poor, penniless wretch. But we don't so much like the second half of that statement because we want to believe that God actually pays attention and is impressed with our accomplishments, our morality, our growth, our offerings. We want to believe we can impress the Lord and get ahead of others. I mean, that's the way the world works, right? If you apply for a job, you go in with the understanding that if everything works out the way it should, the most qualified person will get the position. If you play a sport, a team sport, you know that if you're bigger and smarter and faster and stronger than the other guy, you'll probably get the starting spot. You know that movie stars and cover models are just prettier than the rest of us. Well, prettier than me at least. I don't know about you, but we're used to this idea that you earn your way. And yet with God, it's all grace. It offends our dignity. It offends our pride to think that a person who comes into this church, maybe for the first time, and they're homeless and they're jobless and they've wrecked their family and they've broken laws and they are at the end of their rope, and yet they're the same in the eyes of God as we are. Once they've embraced his grace, they go immediately to the exact same status that we have. And that kind of bugs us, doesn't it? It's because of pride. And thank God for poor Naaman's sake that he had some servants who were wise enough to say, Master, listen, he just wants to heal you. Why don't you just do it? It's easy. He's not asking you to do some terrible thing. He's not asking you to give up a kidney or your firstborn son. I mean, just go in the water. And he does. He mucks his way through that mud. He fights through the swarms of flies. He dips his head in that brown water like a peasant taking a bath, and he comes out with skin as smooth as a baby's. And that's a miracle. And that's the picture of salvation. We go in dirty, we come out clean. We go in dying, we come back raised to new life. And if that has not happened for you, if you can't tell a story of, I once was lost, but now I'm found, and once was blind, but now can see. If you can't tell that story, that can happen for you today, and it'll be the best thing that ever happened to you. But before we get there, let me tell you two quick things. Two quick problems with pride. The dangers of pride. The main two dangers of pride. Number one, pride keeps us from receiving God's grace. I have, in the course of my life, known a lot of non-Christian people who have expressed to me that they admire certain aspects of the Christian faith, especially the person of Jesus. I mean, this is nearly universal when you talk to non-Christians, and they'll say, everything I know about Jesus makes me think he was a great man. He was somebody I really love hearing about and admire, but I just can't believe. And one of the reasons is some of them, they just can't accept grace. I especially when I was in college, a lot of my friends in the dorm were high achieving, highly intelligent type people. And for them, the idea that it's free really bothered them. They wanted it to be hard. They were used to achieving things. They wanted God to sit up on a hill and only those who were really sharp and really diligent could get to him. The idea that anybody can just come to Jesus and say, I need you, and that's that. It just seemed too easy for them. And I've known many others who reject the gospel because they're offended at a God who doesn't conform to their expectations. And they'll say things like, well, if I believed in God, he certainly wouldn't be a God who sent people to hell just for not believing the right things. Or if I believed in a God, he certainly wouldn't be a God who cared as much about who I sleep with as he does about dying children over here in some distant part of the world. And this idea that we can create God in our own image is such a sign of pride. And can we admit that even many Christians have that same issue? How we ignore the parts of the Bible that offend us, that inconvenience us, that make us feel uncomfortable. We major on the ones that make us feel good, that validate us. But boy, we don't want to hear a sermon about love your enemies and pray for those who hate you and forgive others. Come on. If I forgive everybody, then I'd be a doormat. I'd be pushed around. No. We'll just ignore all that, and we'll focus on how God loves me just the way I am. Y'all, I'll tell you something. My wife does not walk around telling people, my husband is 6'6" and a billionaire, and he's got sick dance moves, because none of that is true. And even if she wanted it to be true, she could say it till her breath ran out, and it wouldn't make it true. I am who I am, for better or worse. God is who he is. And if you come to him, you have to come to the true God, not the God you've invented in your mind. That means his grace has to be received on his terms. That means his grace has to be received by a humble person who says, nothing in my hands I bring, simply to thy cross I cling. The second danger of pride is pride keeps us from acknowledging God's grace. Keeps us from receiving it in the first place, but even once we're in the family, pride gets in the way of us telling others and living that life of grace. Why do you think Naaman, after he was healed, the first thing he wanted to do was pay the prophet Elisha? I'm sure there was some gratitude there, but I'm also sure that Naaman was a prideful man who didn't like the idea of owing anyone anything. I would bet that from the time he got to be about 13 years old, no one ever gave him anything that he didn't take. Take by force if necessary, or intimidation. And so to owe somebody something, to owe something so great as a healing to this to this miserable looking little prophet in Galilee. His pride wouldn't abide it. No, I must give you a treasure. I must give you a present. And think about Elisha. I mean, here's a guy that there was more wealth sitting on that chariot than he could have dreamed of. It could have changed his life forever. But he said, no, that's not why I do what I do. See, when we get saved, glory, hallelujah, it's a miracle. But the danger is how quickly we start to decide, I played a part in that. I know it's amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I know the blood of Jesus rescued me from my sins. I believe all that, but I'm a pretty good person. I mean, God, in his way, is a little lucky to have me. We grow in this arrogance. We disassociate ourselves from the people we used to hang out with, and now we're with a more respectable crowd. And we grow more arrogant, more self-righteous, more judgmental. C.S. Lewis famously said, of all the bad men, religious bad men are the worst. And I know so many non-Christians. That's the reason that they don't believe. I mean, one famous example is Gandhi. Gandhi, of course, the hero of India, devout Hindu, and yet knew the New Testament better than most Christians. In fact, he based his whole strategy of nonviolent resistance against the British Empire on the teachings of Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. And he had many Christian friends, and he would periodically be asked, why don't you believe in Jesus? Why don't you become a Christian? And he would say again and again, I like your Christ, I don't like your Christians. And I've known so many other non-Christians, and that's their barrier. It's not some intellectual objection. It's not something you could argue them out of. It's they've met too many Christians who didn't practice what they preached. And they would say, if that's what I'm going to become, if I believe what you believe, then I'm not interested. The true hero of this story. Have you thought about it? Who the true hero of this story in 2 Kings 5 is? It's not the mighty warrior. It's not even the prophet. It's this little slave girl whose name we don't even know. And I want you to put yourself in her shoes. The Bible is written in an ancient time when they don't have to explain certain things because everyone got it, but we don't live in such times. We don't live in times so primitive, so violent, and so we just glide over this idea that she was captured by a Syrian raiding party. What that means is this little girl, whether she was 5 or 8 or 12, she saw one day an army sweep into her village and burn every house and kill nearly everybody. Probably saw her own parents killed in front of her eyes. Snatched away to a land she never thought she'd go to, and given to the family of the man who authored all of that destruction. And in our minds, we say, well, then vengeance is what she needs. That she needs to poison their wine. She needs to set fire to their house while they're all asleep and then just make for home. And even if she can't make it home, at least she dies knowing she got vengeance. That's our way of thinking. But this little girl shows such an incredible grace to say to her mistress, hey, tell my master there's a prophet in Israel who can heal him. That's the hero of the story. That's the gospel. And listen, humility is hard. I'm not going to lie to you. Humility is the slipperiest virtue of all. When I was about the same age as Will, when he had his spelling error, my family, and still to this day, has this big concrete cattle trough in the pasture, and it's about waist high to an adult. Concrete, the cattle drink out of it. My dad, when I was a little kid, put goldfish in there just for fun. And by the time I was 4 or 5, those goldfish were really big. And every time Dad would go out and feed the cows, I'd go out there and try to catch those fish. You've ever tried to catch a fish with your bare hands? I mean, you can probably do it in a fish tank because there's not much room for them to maneuver. But in a big cattle trough, I mean, I could not get my hands on one of those things. One day, my Uncle Jim came over, my dad's youngest brother, and they were sitting talking, and I got bored because I was little, and I decided I'm going to wander out there, and I'm going to catch one of those fish. Today's the day. And I almost did. That was the day I came the closest. I actually had it in my hand, and he started to slip away, and I leaned, and the further I leaned, the more I thought I was going to get it, and all of a sudden, I was in the water. And of course, I come running out of there, and I burst into the house, and my dad and my uncle look up, and they see me covered in mud and algae and just bawling like a baby, and they just died laughing, which didn't help my emotional state. But that's the thing about chasing after humility is if you think you got it, that's when you fall. And you might say, well, Jeff, then why should I pursue it if I'm never going to really get it? And the reason you pursue it is because that's how you become like Jesus. Jesus said again and again and again. I mean, this is the message he just preached from the start of his ministry to the end. Become humble. Chase after humility. That's where greatness comes from. The first will be last. The last will be first. You got to give up your life to gain it. Famously, Mark 10:43-44, whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be the slave of all. Don't try to be the prophet. Don't try to be the general. Be the slave girl. Put others first. Serve the Lord. Don't worry about whether anybody knows your name or not. And then you'll be great. And then you'll live a life worth living. Jesus said these things over and over again. And then finally, on the last night of his life, he strips down to his underclothes and he begins to wash the feet of his disciples, which is an act that not even the lowest slave would willingly do. And they're just stunned by this. And the next day, he tops even that act of humility. He sets aside his power and his glory and his privileges, his proper place at the head of all things, and he allows this small band of evil men to condemn him to death and another small band of evil men to nail him to a cross. He allows these petty, hateful people to spit in his face, and he freely pays the price for all of our sins. And so we're commanded in Scripture again and again to live a Christ-like life. And that means, among other things, to be humble like he is. And the world is crying out to see people who live that way. The world needs to see the grace of God, and they're not going to see it in our pomp. They're not going to see it in our power. They're not going to see it in our boastful living. So here's the question. Are you willing to pray every day, Lord, humble me? Lord, make me humble. Are you willing to make that a daily part of your prayer life? That's where it starts. Pray and then serve others without worrying about who knows your name, and you will become great by the grace of God.